We really have some rock stars here at the table in terms of civil society leadership, some of the new uses of technology and social media to reach voters. So we really do have an all-star panel here, and we're delighted to have you all. We have with us, and we'll speak, we're not quite sitting in the order that we'll speak, but I'm going to start with Tunji Lardner, who is founder and executive director of the West African NGO network, Wangonet. Wangonet is really one of the early cutting-edge kind of technology-based organizations that's using data very much like, I think there's a lot of synergies between them and the TMG work that we've just seen in really collecting and presenting real hard data in ways that people can use and in ways that people can use to make their choices when they get to the vote. And Tunji's going to tell us a little bit more about that as well. We also have Aisha Osori, CEO of Nigerian Women Trust Fund. Aisha was with us in January at our first session, and we liked her so much, we've asked her back. She's doing some phenomenal work in terms of women mobilization, but also how do we get women more engaged in the political process, both on issue-based, but also as candidates. And so she'll talk a little bit about that. Idayat Hassan is executive director of CDD. They've been doing work on voter education, but also kind of examining why voters vote the way they do, what are effective messages, how effective have been some of the anti-violence messaging. Again, in the last election, technically it was a very good one. 800 people died in the aftermath of that election, 800 Nigerian citizens. Was that preventable? It was kind of a crisis of expectations. And I was in Sokoto at the time again, and you saw the jubilation in the streets over the results that they saw at their local polling station, and then in the LGA and the state level. 2 days later, those jubilating crowds turned angry when they learned of the national results, and so. We'll hear a bit from our panelists, kind of how to effectively communicate and engage people that young people listen to, and the leaders at the local level as well. And then finally, Yemi Adamalekim, Executive Director for Enough is Enough, which is doing some great work on voter mobilization, but also on the role of the voter in protecting the vote and how do you engage them in that process. So Tunji, I'm going to start with you. You're welcome to come up here to speak, or you can stay at the panel, whichever you're more comfortable.
I wish I was 2 faces easier then.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome to do a little song for us, but okay, good.
Thank you. This is my proverbial 15 seconds of fame, so I'm going to laugh it all up and enjoy it. Thanks for a very generous introduction. But basically, we're here to talk about the working title here, obviously, is Building an Informed and Active Electorate. I think the larger framing of the issue is really building an informed and active citizenry. And that's at the core of some of the challenges that we have. The reason why I think it's important to have this as a backdrop to our conversation, because it provides some context as to why what seems to be blitheringly obvious does not happen in Nigeria. There's always the implicit assumption that everything here that happens in Nigeria, that there's a legal and rational basis for it. That's not always the case. I said earlier on this morning at a previous meeting that, as they say in relationships, it's complicated. But Nigeria is even more so. It's at once complex and complicated. So in a sense, with regard to Nigeria, it is complexicated. And it's interesting trying to figure out what part of it is complex as a system, which is what some of the work that we've just seen before is doing. It's exposing it, bringing numbers to life and providing some kind of empirical contextual understanding of how the elections went in 2011. However, that is just on the empirical side, the scientific rational basis for trying to understand complex systems. On the complicated side is where we weigh in, because that is where the challenge is about how do you get informed, enlightened, participatory electorate. And, we're going to run through the gamut of, perhaps case studies as to how those challenges are. The Nigerians who live in Nigeria understand what I'm saying. So it's very difficult just listening in from the view from the outside in. But that view from the outside in is equally important because it provides us some kind of, should I say, empirical context, right? We are in the trenches. We're too close to the picture, so we tend not to be able to see the big thing. We see the complications and not fully appreciate the complexities. The view from the outside sees the complexities, but do not fully appreciate the complications. So I'm hoping that before these sessions are over, we'll be able to extract a middle ground in trying to explain it. So how do you get enlightened voters? How do you get, engaged voters? Even when we looked at the last presentation, it was clear. I think Robert mentioned something to the effect that politicians and political parties have no incentive to engage the electorate with regard to voter education and a sense of participatory engagement with elections proper. And the reason why that is so is because, really, I mean, this is a fledgling democracy, maybe 15 years old from 1999. We've never had issues-based elections. There's no incentive for politicians more or less to articulate a position and defend it because that is not the basis for victory at the ballot box. And there's a mentality about that has pervaded Nigerians. There are two things that happen as we look towards 2015 and trying to engage younger voters who are coming on stream. There are two psychological tendencies. One is a mindset that says, why am I voting? My votes don't count anyway. There's that pervasive sense that there's a disengagement between the political process and potentially the benefits of a democratic process that delivers political goods and services. The other tendency is just, I don't know whether it's just a generational alienation from politics, basically, right? But that's a deeper psychological investigation. But that is the baseline of Nigeria. Robert said ever so politely, mentioned the issue of trust. Trust is an integral element of participatory politics. People have to trust the system and trust their leaders. And that is something that is in extremely short supply in Nigeria. So the question now is, how do you create a new constituency around participatory engagement with the hope and promise that at the end of that engagement, that A, whoever you choose to vote for will actually be your candidate, and B, that candidate will now deliver the social goods and services you direly need in terms of democracy. In Nigeria, there was a language in 2000, I think it was, 1999, at the outset of this whole democratic experiment called the democracy dividend. And it was supposed to be something that we got out of years of militarization, out of the coups and counter-coups, that it was going to usher in an epoch of political stability and unbridled growth. In a way, it has happened. It's not entirely gloom. I mean, the fact that Nigeria still remains together itself is a miracle of perception, perhaps, but it's a miracle nonetheless. But these are dire times. Earlier on today, we're doing the analysis of where Nigeria was. And, there are two narratives. One is the old narrative about Nigeria getting to the edge of disaster every time. And so again, Nigeria is yet again at the crossroads. And, you roll your eyes and say, okay, so what's new now? Well, what's new now is that there are other dimensions that have been added to it. One is, of course, the issue of insurgency up north, which really, at the heart of it, is fueled by poverty, ignorance, all the things that democracy should effectively be challenging if the political platforms and the process of political engagement were based on the needs of the citizens. So it is clear that the political class, I sent a tweet a little while ago that to win elections in Nigeria, voters are optional. And that is so true. What we have to do is really change that narrative. And we're being perforce charged with looking at the narrative all over again. There's a prevalent narrative of Nigeria, but there's still some good news in the actual electoral practice. It was very strange to hear the chairperson of a political party openly praise INEC, but they do deserve some congratulatory words. I participated in the last 3 gubernatorial elections, Anambra, Osun, and Ekiti. So there's a marginal improvement. But the challenge with INEC is really the economics of scale. It's not enough to have elections in 3 states, right? But what happens when you're dealing with a much larger constituency? And those are the challenges we're having. Beneath that, again, is this issue of not so much as voter education as much as it is civic education. Some people are already saying the elections are not going to hold. Politicians have said that publicly, they've retracted. And this is all because there's a cynical game of power going on and power acquisition without any regard to what the consequences are. In the old modeling, the political elite had always managed to come together on the basis of some expedient process. The last time it was, I think, the doctrine of necessity, when the incumbent president died and there were all kinds of political jostling. And the constitution was clear. Your president is incapacitated for a particular period of time, your vice president steps in. But that was not the case of Nigeria. So we had a dying president somewhere in Saudi Arabia somewhere, and then this whole masquerade and palace theatrics about keeping him alive and all kinds of stuff, in spite of the fact that it was clear. And then nobody would step up to defend the Constitution, and then finally, when it became clear that it wasn't going to happen the way they wanted to, the Senate had what they call the doctrine of necessity. It's always this recourse to expedient solutions to exigent crises that has marked Nigeria's challenges and its failures. The inability to formalize the process, the inability to have a platform that is indeed legal, rational, means that people do not trust the system. So there's a whole bunch of things that are evolving now that we think will make this somewhat different. As to how far different, I'm not certain. But 2 things have happened that were not part of the initial equation. One is the insurgency up in the northeastern part of Nigeria. And that has put the fear of disintegration in the hearts of everybody, because it is clear that there's something there that the state itself cannot fully respond to. The other thing that is somewhat neglected, but has also for the very first time generated some kind of a consensus of citizenship and civic engagement, is the Chibok incident. I mean, yes, for a while it was trending, social media's famous, flavor of the month it was perhaps, but beneath that has been, for the first time, you see a regrouping of a certain kind of civic engagement, a new kind of citizenship emerging around an issue that was not political, that was not economic, but an issue that touched the hearts of everybody. You cannot be more concerned than be concerned about your daughters and your children by extension. And the response of the government itself was, if you ever wanted proof about just how dislocated and disjointed and totally disconnected the ruling elites were from the so-called citizens, the Chibok incident exposed it way beyond anybody's expectations. It was very clear that if indeed there was a social contract, and that is up for question, that social contract had been broken. And elsewhere, in a more legal, rational space, the very idea of an incumbent president running on his record, such as it is now, would be absurd. But that is not the case in Nigeria. And the fact that also you have another, should I say, I'm not exactly how to, I'm trying to be very polite here now, but a poke in the eye of the citizens by the Jonathan campaign theme in appropriating the Bring Back Our Girls hashtag to bring back Goodluck Jonathan in 2015. I mean, there's just something about it that is just surreal for me. So I can't even frame a response around it. But it's a very symbolic thing for us to understand, because what it says essentially is that you, the people, do not really matter in this. I said it earlier on in a little tweet that to win elections, the voters are incidental. On the flip side of that argument is actually the attitude of the voters themselves, right? And there are all kinds of reasons that can be adduced as to why there's general apathy. Yes, we can make the excuse of militarization, the fact that we've been under military rule, we haven't had the experience of actually unfurling democratic practices and principles. But there's something really terribly wrong with the Nigerian voter. So it's not enough for us to blame the ruling elite. There's a sense that somehow, and I don't want to go into any deep socio-anthropological explanation as to why this can be, but there's something about the Nigerian voter that just makes him think that somehow this process that is before you is really not important enough for you to invest your time and commitment to it. We seem to have a very short attention span, because they think the whole democratic experience is basically showing up for elections and you vote and that's it. That's why I was saying earlier on that it's complexicated. The complicated part of it is a very Nigerian phenomenon. I don't think it plays out elsewhere. But there's certain parts of it that are just very, ordinary, garden variety African states and citizenship issues. But in this particular instance, where again at the precipice, and we're not certain if the political elite consensus that has kept Nigeria from tipping totally over will hold. But somehow we're optimistic that it will, because that's how Nigeria has always been. So there are two things I want to leave you with before. I think we have to look at it differently, and I'm hoping that as much input from the view outside in, as much as it is that we can provide the view from the inside out, we provide some kind of a balance. The issue of the insurgency is important because it's a threat to the existential life of Nigeria. But there's something that has also happened with the Chibok episode that has started a different kind of civic engagement. Because it is not directly political per se, we might not be able to put some kind of a normative value as to it. But there's something that is happening, and perhaps we're beginning to see the emergence of a new type of Nigerian citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tunji. I do want to say one of the positive things was, to his credit, President Jonathan did speak out against that campaign slogan as soon as it came out, and that. Well, that politics is ugly, but that's going to happen again and again, I'm sure, in the election process. One of the things, and we tried to get our political leaders when they were here, it's incumbent on the political leadership to speak out when members of their party engage in that kind of rhetoric, and this actually was an instance where they did. So just. But then, as a side conversation tonight, it was only when the Washington Post wrote an editorial about it. It was only when the Washington Post wrote an editorial about it that prompted the response from the executive. Okay, well, I don't know the cause and effect, or was there a correlation or a causality, but at any rate. But that is an instance where you can speak out.